In modern Chinese dramas, there is one role that never disappears: the CEO. Cold, rich, untouchable. The man who walks into a room, and suddenly everything feels expensive. But playing a CEO visually is not as easy as wearing a suit, because the real challenge is not looking rich. It is making the audience believe you were born powerful. The way he speaks, the way he looks at people, the way silence feels heavier when he is in control. And when it comes to Chinese actors who truly own that CEO aura, three names are rising fast: Wang Ziqi, Ao Ruipeng, Song Weilong. Wang Ziqi brings sharp dominance and natural authority. Ao Ruipeng brings youthful charisma with hidden edge. Song Weilong brings cold elegance, the classic CEO visual that feels almost unreal. Three different vibes, three different types of tongue tie. But who truly feels like the most convincing CEO on screen? The biggest mistake people make with CEO vibes roles is thinking the job is just to look handsome in a suit. It is not. A convincing CEO on screen needs something harder to fake: authority that feels natural. Because audiences can immediately tell the difference between an actor who is playing rich and an actor who feels like he has always lived in power. It shows in posture, voice, eye contact, timing, and how little effort it takes for the character to control a scene. That is why Wang Ziqi, Ao Ruipeng, and Song Weilong make such an interesting top three. Wang Ziqi represents dominance. His CEO vibe comes from sharp delivery, strong presence, and the feeling that he is always one step ahead in a conversation. He does not need exaggerated acting to feel powerful. Ao Ruipeng represents rising charisma. His version of a tongue tie feels younger, more unpredictable, but still carries an edge that suggests hidden control beneath a relaxed surface. Song Weilong represents visual perfection. His face, height, and cold aura fit the CEO image almost effortlessly. The kind of man who looks like he belongs in a luxury office before he even says a line. So this ranking is not only about who looks best in a suit. It is about four things: authority, screen presence, emotional control, and how believable the power feels. Because the best CEO actor is not the one who tells you he is rich. It is the one who makes you believe it without trying. If there is one actor in this ranking who naturally understands the rhythm of a CEO role, it is Wang Ziqi. What makes Wang Ziqi so convincing as a CEO vibes is not only his appearance, it is his control. Because many actors can wear expensive suits and stand inside luxury offices, but far fewer can create the feeling that they belong there, that power is already part of their personality, not something added by the script. Wang Ziqi has that advantage. His screen presence carries natural authority, the kind that makes even simple dialogue feel deliberate. That is why his CEO aura works so well. He rarely overacts dominance. He does not need to constantly raise his voice, act aggressively, or force intensity into every scene. Instead, his power comes from calmness, the way he pauses before speaking, the way he watches other characters, the way he gives the impression that he already understands the situation before everyone else does. That kind of restraint is extremely important for tongue tie roles, because real authority often looks controlled. And Wang Ziqi understands that better than many actors in this genre. His facial structure and sharp features also help build that image. He looks clean, composed, and intelligent, the type of modern drama male lead audiences immediately associate with success. But what makes him stronger than actors who only have visuals is that his energy feels managerial. He does not just look like a rich man. He feels like someone used to making decisions. That difference matters, because audiences today are harder to convince than before. A CEO character cannot survive only on cold stares and luxury cars anymore. Viewers want charisma, tension, emotional pressure, and believable social dominance. Wang Ziqi delivers that through timing and confidence rather than exaggeration, and that is why his romantic chemistry also works. His CEO vibe creates emotional tension naturally. When a character like his softens, protects someone, becomes jealous, or loses emotional control for even a moment, the scene immediately becomes stronger. The contrast matters. The colder the authority, the more impactful the vulnerability feels. That is one of his biggest strengths as a modern drama actor. Compared with Ao Ruipeng, Wang Ziqi feels more mature and structurally powerful. Compared with Song Weilong, he feels less dreamlike but more actively commanding. Song Weilong may embody the fantasy image of a CEO, but Wang Ziqi often feels more believable inside the actual role itself, and in Tongtai dramas, believability is everything, because the audience is not really watching for business meetings or corporate strategy. They are watching for emotional power, the fantasy of a man who can control the world outside, but slowly loses control inside love. Wang Ziqi's aura fits that fantasy extremely well. That is why he belongs firmly in this top 3. He represents the modern CEO male lead at his most controlled, sharp, and naturally dominant, the kind of actor who does not need to announce authority because the audience already feels it the moment he enters the frame. If Wang Ziqi feels like the polished executive already in control of the company, then Ao Ruipeng feels like the younger CEO audiences underestimate at first, until the charisma starts taking over the screen. That is what makes his CEO vibe interesting. Ao Ruipeng's strength is not traditional coldness. He does not rely entirely on distance or emotional stiffness to create authority. Instead, he brings something lighter on the surface: charm, ease, youthful confidence, while quietly hiding sharpness underneath. That combination makes his CEO image feel more modern and unpredictable, because today's audience does not always want the same old, emotionless businessman. They want someone who feels alive, and Ao Ruipeng understands that. His screen presence carries energy. Even when he is playing a composed character, there is movement underneath, a sense that the character is thinking, reacting, testing people. That makes him feel less like a static, perfect CEO fantasy and more like a younger man actively learning how to dominate his world. That gives his performances freshness. What also helps Ao Ruipeng enormously is his visual charisma. He has the kind of face that works well between softness and confidence. He can appear playful in one moment and unexpectedly intense in the next. That duality is very effective in romance-heavy CEO dramas because it creates emotional unpredictability. The audience never feels completely comfortable around him, and that tension is attractive. Compared with Song Weilong, Ao Ruipeng feels less untouchable and more emotionally expressive. Compared with Wang Ziqi, he feels younger and less traditionally authoritative. But that youth becomes part of his advantage. His Tongtai aura feels closer to the new generation of wealthy male leads, stylish, emotionally reactive, charming, but still capable of sudden control when necessary. That is why he belongs in this top 3. He represents a newer version of the CEO fantasy, not only cold power, but charismatic power. The kind of man who can flirt, provoke, tease, and still feel dangerous once the emotional stakes rise. And in modern Chinese romance dramas, that balance matters more and more. Because audiences are no longer satisfied with a CEO who is only rich and handsome. They want one who feels emotionally alive enough to create chemistry, and powerful enough to dominate the room when the moment demands it. Ao Ruipeng brings exactly that energy. If Wang Ziqi represents controlled authority and Ao Ruipeng represents charismatic modern power, then Song Weilong represents the pure fantasy version of a CEO male lead, the kind that almost looks unreal. That is his greatest advantage. Because the moment Song Weilong appears on screen, the visual logic of the Tongtai role already works. His height, facial structure, calm expression, and naturally cold aura fit the image so perfectly that the audience immediately understands the character type before he even speaks. And in romance dramas, that first impression is powerful. Song Weilong has the kind of face that feels expensive, clean, distant, elegant. He looks like someone who belongs inside luxury hotels, glass offices, and high-rise city views. That visual compatibility with the CEO archetype is one of the strongest in his generation. But what makes him especially effective is the stillness. Unlike actors who create dominance through aggressive energy, Song Weilong often creates it through emotional distance. He can stand quietly in a scene and still control its atmosphere. That works extremely well for Tongtai characters because many of these roles are built on emotional restraint. Men who are hard to approach, hard to read, and therefore emotionally magnetic. That is where his CEO vibe becomes addictive. Because audiences are not only attracted to power, they are attracted to mystery. They want to see the cold man slowly become emotionally vulnerable. And Song Weilong's screen presence naturally supports that kind of slow emotional reveal. Compared with Ao Ruipeng, he feels colder and more idealized. Compared with Wang Ziqi, he feels less actively dominant, but more visually iconic. Wang Ziqi may feel more realistic as an executive, but Song Weilong feels like the version romance dramas dream about, the perfect fantasy CEO. And fantasy matters in this genre, because CEO dramas are not documentaries about business. They are emotional fantasies about status, control, desire, and the fantasy of being chosen by someone who seems impossible to reach. Song Weilong understands that atmosphere extremely well. His presence alone can make a scene feel softer, richer, and more cinematic. That is why he belongs firmly in this top 3. He represents the CEO male lead at his most visually complete, cold, elegant, untouchable, and emotionally restrained enough to keep audiences chasing every small moment of softness. And sometimes, in romance dramas, that fantasy is exactly what makes a CEO unforgettable. So in the end, the real question is not who wears the best suit. It is who makes the audience believe in power the most. Because the CEOI role has never really been about business. It is about fantasy, emotional control, status. The feeling that one man can dominate an entire room without needing to prove himself loudly. And when you place Wang Ziqi, Ao Ruipeng, and Song Weilong side by side, each actor represents a different version of that fantasy. With Ao Ruipeng, the power is charisma. His CEO vibe feels youthful, modern, and emotionally alive. He brings energy into the role instead of only coldness, which makes his chemistry-driven scenes especially effective. He represents the newer generation of Tongtai male leads, less robotic, more emotionally reactive, and more playful with power. But compared with the other two, his authority still feels slightly less complete and less naturally overwhelming. With Song Weilong, the power is visual perfection. He may be one of the most naturally CEO-looking actors of his generation. His height, face, calm aura, and emotional distance fit the fantasy image almost too well. He turns the Tongtai role into something cinematic, cold, elegant, untouchable. But because his strength is so rooted in atmosphere and visual aura, there are moments where the fantasy feels stronger than the realism. And that is why Wang Ziqi rises to the top, because among these three, he feels the most believable inside the role itself. Song Weilong gives you the perfect CEO fantasy. Ao Ruipeng gives you modern charismatic power. But Wang Ziqi gives you authority that feels lived in. That is the difference. He does not only look rich, he feels experienced, controlled, strategic. His dominance comes from timing, restraint, and confidence, rather than visual perfection alone. When he enters a scene, it feels like the character already understands the room before anyone else does. That kind of natural command is exactly what the Tongtai genre needs. Because the best CEO male lead is not simply handsome. He makes the audience believe people would actually follow him. And Wang Ziqi creates that illusion extremely well. That is why, in the end, he stands at the top. Ao Ruipeng gives us charismatic youth. Song Weilong gives us cold fantasy. Wang Ziqi gives us believable power. 3 actors, 3 CEO styles, 3 different ways to dominate a modern romance drama, but only one actor who feels like he was born to control the room the moment he walks in. And that is why, in the end, Wang Ziqi wins the title of the most convincing CEO among them.